A scorching summer afternoon in New York. The oppressive summer heat of New York engulfed the crowded streets, where thousands of people hurried along, lost in the relentless pace of life. Amid the congestion of vehicles, Donald Trump's Cadillac One convoy glided through, a symbol of power in the heart of the city. Inside the car, Trump listened intently to a senior advisor's report on the economic situation, the steady voice blending with the cacophony of honking horns outside. Suddenly, something in the crowd caught his eye, pulling his attention away from the stack of documents in his hands. A frail, middle-aged woman knelt on the pavement, clutching a small boy tightly in her arms. Her face bore deep lines of exhaustion, her unkempt hair disheveled, and her tear-streaked eyes filled with desperation. The boy, around 8 years old, looked pale and emaciated, his breath faint like a flickering candle about to be snuffed out. In her trembling hands, she held an old, tattered sign, its scribbled message crying out for help. "Please help. My son is dying, and I have nothing left to save him." Trump narrowed his eyes, deep in thought. He had seen many struggles before, but there was something about this scene that he couldn't ignore. This woman wasn't just begging, she was fighting for her son's life. "Stop the car." Trump's voice was cold yet firm, unwavering in its command. The driver hesitated for a split second before obeying, slamming on the brakes. The armored limousine came to a sudden halt in the middle of the street, setting off a chain reaction as the vehicles behind it were forced to stop abruptly. Chaos erupted as the halted traffic triggered a chorus of blaring horns. Inside the car, the security team was on high alert. A bodyguard quickly spoke up. "Sir, this is not a secure location. We must keep moving immediately." Trump didn't respond. His decision was made, and nothing would change his mind. Without hesitation, he opened the car door and stepped out onto the street. The moment Trump's polished shoes touched the pavement, the world around him seemed to pause. Pedestrians froze, their eyes widening in disbelief before realization dawned upon them. Donald Trump, the billionaire, the former president of the United States, was standing in the middle of the street in front of a homeless woman. The murmurs in the crowd grew, and many pulled out their phones to record the surreal scene unfolding before them. Trump walked slowly toward the woman, his usual cold and calculated demeanor replaced by something else, something more human. As he neared, he crouched down and locked eyes with her. "What's your name?" His voice was deep but steady. The woman looked up, disbelief washing over her gaunt face. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice hoarse from too much crying. "Evelyn? Evelyn Carter." Trump nodded, his gaze shifting to the frail boy in her arms. The child was too weak to lift his head, his breathing shallow, his thin arms hanging limp. "And the boy?" Evelyn tightened her hold on her son, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Lucas. My son. He's not going to make it. I've done everything I could, but no one will help us. No one." Trump remained silent for a few seconds, but in his eyes, the eyes of a man who had fought countless battles in the business world, there was now a resolute determination. "Get in my car." Evelyn's eyes widened. She blinked, as if struggling to process what she had just heard. "But Trump didn't give her a chance to refuse. He turned to his security team, his tone sharp and commanding. "I'm not letting this child die. Get them in the car, now." Two security agents swiftly moved in, carefully assisting Evelyn and Lucas into the limousine. As the car door shut behind them, Trump turned to the bodyguard beside him. "Take us to the best hospital in the city, immediately." Without hesitation, the convoy roared to life, speeding through the now-cleared road. Inside the car, Trump glanced down at Lucas, the boy fighting for every breath, clinging to life. Evelyn, her face streaked with tears, held onto her son as if letting go would mean losing him forever. Trump clenched his fist. He knew the real battle was just beginning. The Cadillac One races against time. The Cadillac One sped through the streets, leaving behind the curious gazes of the crowd. Inside the spacious cabin, a tense silence loomed. Evelyn sat clutching Lucas tightly, her frail hands gently stroking his sweat-soaked hair. The boy's breathing was labored, his lips pale, as if life itself was slipping away from his small body. Opposite them, Trump sat watching Lucas intently. This was no longer a random encounter. It was a battle between life and death. How much longer? Trump's voice was impatient, sharp. A bodyguard checked the navigation device. Mount Sinai Hospital. 3 more minutes, sir. 3 minutes. Too long in a situation like this. Trump turned to Evelyn. When did Lucas's condition start? Evelyn wiped her tears, her voice trembling. More than a year ago. The doctor said he was born with a heart condition. I did everything I could. Cleaning houses, waiting tables, carrying heavy loads, but the medicine was too expensive. Then I lost my job, lost our home, and Lucas just kept getting weaker. I begged for help, went to public hospitals, but they turned us away because I had no insurance. No one wants to save a poor child. Her words ignited a fire of anger deep within Trump. Was this system really letting a child die just because his mother couldn't afford treatment? Lucas stirred slightly, his weak eyes fluttering open. He looked at Trump, not with fear, but with the innocent curiosity of a child. Who are you? The boy's voice was faint, barely above a whisper. Trump leaned forward, his gaze softening. I'm Donald Trump, and I'm going to help you. Lucas blinked, a faint smile appearing on his lips. Are you as rich as on TV? Trump chuckled, not at the question, but at the fact that even at death's door, this boy could still say something so innocent. Richer than you think. He raised an eyebrow. But what matters is, you don't have to worry about money anymore. You're going to be okay, kid. Lucas let out a small smile before slipping into a deep sleep. Evelyn panicked. Lucas, baby, wake up! The car screeched to a halt in front of the hospital entrance. A team of doctors was already waiting, the doors of an emergency vehicle flung open. Get him to the ER immediately, one of the doctors shouted. Medical staff rushed to lift Lucas onto a stretcher, wheeling him inside. Evelyn tried to run after him, but Trump placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his voice unwavering. You have to be strong. We got him here. Now they will save him. Evelyn, choking back sobs, nodded and hurried after her son. Trump turned to his security detail. I want a list of every child in this hospital in the same situation as Lucas. And I want to know why they aren't getting treatment just because of insurance issues. The bodyguard nodded and immediately left to gather information. Nearly an hour passed before the chief surgeon stepped out of the ER, his face grim. Lucas is in critical condition. We need to perform emergency heart surgery immediately. But his case isn't the only one. Trump narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? The doctor sighed and gestured toward the left hallway. There are dozens of other children here, all in the same situation. Most are from homeless or low-income families. No insurance, no hope. Some of them may not make it through the week. Trump turned his head. Along the hospital corridor, frail children lay curled on their beds, their hollow eyes reflecting exhaustion, their breaths weak and uneven. Beside them, mothers sat in despair, some whispering prayers, others just holding their children in silent agony. A wave of anger surged inside Trump. They didn't deserve this. He clenched his fists, then turned to his bodyguard. Get my financial team on the phone. Now. The bodyguard nodded, pulling out his phone immediately. The chief surgeon looked at Trump, hope flickering in his tired eyes. What are you going to do? Trump's answer was brief. Not just save Lucas, I'm saving all of them. Within 24 hours, Trump's plan unfolded at lightning speed. Lucas and 27 other children were rushed into surgery, receiving the best medical care available. A special investigative team was formed to uncover the pharmaceutical scandal that had destroyed Evelyn's life. Major medical organizations began stepping in to fund treatment for underprivileged children nationwide. Trump stood in the hospital waiting room, gazing through the glass window. Inside the ICU, Lucas lay peacefully, his breathing steady. The boy had been saved. But Trump knew this story was far from over. A bodyguard approached, handing him a new file. Sir, you need to see this. Trump opened it, and immediately his expression darkened. Trump flips through the files and uncovers a darker truth. Trump swiftly scanned the documents, his eyes absorbing every word, every number, every red-stamped seal, pieces of a puzzle forming a sinister picture. This wasn't just a tragic mistake. This was a deliberate plan. The documents revealed that Helix Med, one of the largest pharmaceutical corporations in the U.S., had been distributing counterfeit heart medication to patients for years. The victims? The poor? Those who couldn't afford top-tier medical care turned into human test subjects in a ruthless experiment. Worse yet, the corruption ran deep. The scandal wasn't just limited to corporate executives. A long list of politicians, healthcare officials, and senior doctors had taken bribes to silence anyone who dared to speak up. Evelyn Carter had been one of those victims, punished for trying to expose the truth. Trump clenched his fist, his eyes burning with fury. He was no stranger to the dirty games of finance and politics, but this was beyond greed. This was murder. He looked up at Evelyn, who was watching him anxiously. Trump placed the file down on the table, his voice low but unwavering. "We're not letting them get away with this." Evelyn swallowed hard, her eyes widening. "You mean?" Trump leaned back in his chair, his expression set in stone. "I'm taking this public, but first, I need evidence. Everything you have on Helix Med." Evelyn nodded without hesitation. "I still have my old files. They're hidden in an abandoned storage unit outside the city. If we retrieve them, we can prove everything." Trump nodded and turned to his security team. "Send a team with her. Secure the files at any cost." The security team immediately mobilized. Meanwhile, Trump pulled out his phone and made a call to one of his top lawyers. "Prepare a federal lawsuit. We're taking down Helix Med and every corrupt official behind them." The storage unit, a dangerous retrieval. 2 hours later, a black SUV sped towards the outskirts of the city. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, hands clenched, heart pounding at what awaited them. The vehicle came to a halt. 2 armed security officers stepped out first, scanning the area before giving the all-clear signal. Evelyn took a deep breath and entered the dust-covered warehouse. The air was thick with the scent of neglect. She moved toward an old metal cabinet, yanking it open. Inside, a small wooden box sat untouched in the corner. This was it, the proof she needed. But just as she lifted the files, a sound echoed from the warehouse entrance. One of the security guards stiffened, immediately drawing his gun. "Someone's coming!" The warehouse doors slammed open. 3 men in dark suits stepped in, their faces stone cold. One of them spoke. "Mrs. Carter, we thought you had learned your lesson, but it seems you still don't know when to stop." Evelyn's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." One of the men smirked. "Oh, and you think Trump can protect you?" He raised a hand, signaling his men to move forward. But before they could take a step, blinding floodlights illuminated the entire warehouse. A convoy of black security vehicles surrounded the area. The doors of a limousine swung open, and Trump stepped out, standing in the light, his expression cold as steel. "I think you're the ones who don't know when to stop." The 3 men froze, their faces turning pale. One of them instinctively reached for his phone, but Trump smirked. "Don't bother. I already sent everything to the FBI." One of them bolted, trying to escape, but Trump's security team took them down instantly. Evelyn exhaled sharply, relief washing over her as she turned to Trump. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" Trump shrugged, raising an eyebrow. "I never enter a battle unless I know I'll win." Evelyn let out a breathless laugh, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Not from fear, but for the first time in years, from hope. 48 hours later, a nation shaken. Within 2 days, a scandal exploded across America. Helix Med was placed under federal investigation, with its CEO arrested immediately. Dozens of politicians and healthcare officials were exposed for their involvement. Evelyn Carter's name was cleared, and she was reinstated as a licensed doctor. But more importantly, millions of Americans finally learned the truth. At a national press conference, Trump took the stage, his gaze piercing as he faced hundreds of cameras. They thought the poor had no voice. They thought the weak could be ignored. But today, we proved them wrong. The crowd erupted in applause. Trump turned toward Evelyn, standing beside him. She looked out at the audience, where Lucas sat, smiling, full of life. Trump's voice rang out once more. "We didn't just save one child. We changed the system. And I promise you, this is only the beginning." America trembled, and from this moment forward, a new era began. 4 weeks after the Helix Med scandal, a story of hope. 4 weeks after the Helix Med scandal, Mount Sinai Hospital remained the epicenter of media attention. Lucas had successfully undergone surgery thanks to the elite team of doctors personally appointed by Trump. Now, the boy was recovering under the close watch of medical experts. In the softly lit hospital room, Evelyn sat by her son's bedside, her trembling hands gently running through his hair. For days, she had not left Lucas's side, holding her breath at every fluctuation on the heart monitor, and now his heart was beating stronger than ever. The door creaked open gently. A familiar figure stepped inside, Donald Trump. Evelyn immediately stood up. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and deep respect. Not just because he had saved her son, but because he had restored something she thought was lost forever: faith. "How's Lucas?" Trump asked, his voice softer than usual. Evelyn smiled, tears of relief streaming down her weary cheeks. "The doctors say the surgery was a success. He'll need time to recover, but he's going to live. If it weren't for you." She stopped, her emotions overwhelming her. Trump stepped closer to the hospital bed, gazing down at Lucas, the boy who had once teetered on the brink of death, now sleeping peacefully. A rare feeling stirred within Trump, the satisfaction of knowing he had truly made a difference. Suddenly, Lucas stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He turned his head, first seeing his mother, then shifting his gaze to the man standing beside her. "Mr. Trump?" His voice was weak, but filled with wonder. Trump leaned down, a rare smile appearing on his face. "That's right, kid. Do you remember me?" Lucas blinked, then suddenly flashed a bright grin. "Are you really rich?" Chuckled, not at the question, but at the innocence that still remained in this boy despite all he had endured. "Richer than you think? But what matters more is that you're safe now, and you don't have to worry anymore." Lucas locked eyes with Trump, and in that moment, something changed. His gaze no longer held just gratitude. It held determination. "I want to be a doctor, like my mom." Gasp. Turning to her son. "Lucas, you?" Lucas nodded firmly. "I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. I want to save people." Trump nodded approvingly, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's a big dream, kid, but I believe you can do it." Evelyn looked at her son with pride, then turned to Trump. "You've changed our lives, but I know this isn't where you stop, is it?" Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. "You're right, this is just the beginning." 3 months later, a new chapter in history. 3 months later, New York City witnessed a groundbreaking event. Among the towering skyscrapers, a new facility was unveiled, Lucas Hope Hospital. More than a hospital, it was a statement, a declaration of war against the corrupt healthcare system that had abandoned thousands of homeless families and sick children. On stage, Evelyn stood beside Trump, her eyes burning with newfound energy. She was no longer a desperate mother begging for help. She was a doctor, a fighter, a woman who had reclaimed her destiny. Trump stepped forward, his gaze piercing through the crowd. His voice rang out with power and conviction. 3 months ago, I met a mother on the brink of losing her child, a boy left to die because our system turned its back on him. Today, they stand here, stronger than ever. And I promise you, this is not just a hospital. This is a symbol of hope. The crowd erupted in applause. Trump's voice grew sharper, cutting through the air like a blade. "No one should ever die because they can't afford treatment. This is a fight I will see through to the end." As his speech ended, the audience roared in agreement. For the first time in U.S. history, a privately funded free hospital was established, backed by Trump's personal donations and his newly launched charity initiative, Hope for the Forgotten. A new legacy begins. 1 week after its grand opening, Lucas Hope officially welcomed its first patients. Homeless children, uninsured families, and struggling individuals walked through its doors, receiving medical treatment without fear of being turned away. Dressed in her pristine white coat, Dr. Evelyn Carter stepped into the first patient's room. A small girl lay in bed, awaiting surgery. Evelyn gently took her hand. "Don't be afraid. We're going to help you." The little girl looked up at her, eyes filled with trust, squeezing her hand tightly. From across the room, Lucas stood watching. his eyes gleaming with purpose. He had seen his mother at her lowest, and now he was seeing her at her strongest. Lucas turned, his gaze landing on the hospital's grand entrance. A massive plaque adorned the wall, etched in golden letters with a quote from Donald Trump. Every great journey begins with a single step. Help, act, and never turn your back on those who need you. Lucas smiled. He knew his journey was just beginning. From a small story to a national movement, what began as a simple story, a desperate mother abandoned by the system, and a boy who nearly lost his life to a broken healthcare system, soon grew into a nationwide movement. Hope for the Forgotten was no longer just a name. It became a symbol of change, a wake-up call to those who had long manipulated the lives of the weak. But Trump wasn't stopping there. At a high-stakes press conference at the White House, he stood before hundreds of journalists, his face firm, his eyes ablaze. This was no longer just about charity. This was a revolution. Trump stepped up to the podium, his voice cutting through the silence like thunder. We have seen a healthcare system that abandons children like Lucas and leaves mothers like Evelyn to suffer in despair. But that ends now. Today, I am announcing that Hope for the Forgotten will not stop at one hospital. We are taking this movement nationwide, and I promise you, no one will be forgotten. The room erupted in applause. Trump continued, I am calling on businesses, charities, and capable individuals. Join this mission. We will build more free hospitals, provide education for homeless children, and establish housing for struggling families. This is not charity. This is responsibility. Within 3 months, the response was overwhelming. The free hospital network expanded. After Lucas's hope in New York, new hospitals were built in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Houston. Housing initiatives. Entire housing complexes were constructed to provide shelter for homeless families, giving them a second chance at life. Education for underprivileged children. A network of schools for homeless and low-income children was launched, offering them a path out of poverty. But Trump didn't stop there. He established a legal defense fund to fight for victims of corporate and healthcare corruption. No more cases like Evelyn Carter's would be ignored. A movement that started in New York soon swept across the nation. Celebrities, business leaders, and even former critics of Trump admitted he had created something extraordinary. Doctors who had once lost their jobs for speaking out against pharmaceutical giants now had places to work in these new free hospitals. Children who once slept under bridges now had a bed to call their own and an education to change their future. The moment that changed everything. At the grand opening of a new hospital in Chicago, Trump saw Lucas again. The boy was healthier, brighter, filled with hope. He was no longer a child on the brink of death. He was now the symbol of a new generation. Lucas looked up at Trump, his voice steady and determined. You kept your promise, Mr. Trump. Now it's my turn. Trump raised an eyebrow, a proud smile forming. And what are you going to do, kid? Lucas lifted his chin. I'm going to study hard. I'm going to become a doctor and help other kids. Just like you helped me. Trump placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, his eyes reflecting a rare hint of emotion. You're going to do great things, Lucas, and I'll be right here to see you achieve them. Beyond America, a global movement. Within a year, Hope for the Forgotten was no longer just an American movement. Countries around the world began reaching out to Trump for guidance on launching similar humanitarian projects. In Africa, a clean water initiative was launched, giving millions of people access to safe drinking water. In Southeast Asia, free medical centers were established, ensuring children received vaccinations and basic health care. In South America, new schools were built for rural children, breaking the cycle of poverty through education. Trump at the United Nations, a defining speech. 1 year later, Trump stood on stage at the United Nations Humanitarian Summit. As he looked across the thousands of world leaders, activists, and diplomats, he took a deep breath, then spoke, his voice commanding attention. Governments have a duty to their people. Children do not choose to be born into poverty. Mothers do not choose to become homeless. But we, those with power, can choose to act. The entire hall rose in applause. This was no longer just an American movement. This was a global revolution. The legacy of hope. One evening in New York, Trump stood on the top floor of his office building, looking down at the city lights. A top advisor walked in, holding a report. Sir, the movement has exceeded all expectations. We've impacted over 10 million lives worldwide. Trump nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. 10 million is a great number, but there are still hundreds of millions out there, waiting for us. He turned back to the window, his gaze sharper than ever. Get ready, we're just getting started. 12 months after the first Lucas Hope Hospital, a global movement is born. 1 year after the grand opening of the first Lucas Hope Hospital, Hope for the Forgotten was no longer just a humanitarian project. It had become a symbol of change across the world. In the U.S., the free hospital network expanded to 15 major cities, providing medical care to millions of uninsured Americans. Educational centers for homeless children began popping up across multiple states, giving abandoned kids a new chance to learn and grow. But the most astonishing impact was felt beyond U.S. borders. Governments in Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia, once apathetic to the struggles of the poor, began reaching out to Trump's team to replicate the model in their own countries. A historic gathering at the U.S. Capitol. On a crisp spring afternoon in Washington, tens of thousands gathered in front of the U.S. Capitol. Today marked a historic event, a national tribute to Hope for the Forgotten and those who had helped change the world. On the massive stage, Trump stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces stretching before him. These were not just politicians, CEOs, and celebrities. They were people who had once been forgotten, whose lives had been transformed by this movement. As the thunderous applause died down, Trump spoke, his voice deep, powerful, and unwavering. 2 years ago, I stopped my car on a crowded street. I saw a mother on her knees, holding her dying son, abandoned by the very system that was supposed to save him. He paused, his sharp gaze sweeping across the audience. But I didn't just see 2 people. I saw millions more, people facing the same struggle, the same despair. Trump's voice grew stronger. I made a promise that day, and today we stand here together, proving that promise has become reality. The crowd erupted into applause. But Trump wasn't finished. But we are not done. We are only just beginning, because out there are still more Lucases, there are still more Evelyns, and we cannot abandon them. The entire square rose to its feet, cheers echoing across Washington. Trump raised a hand for silence, then smirked slightly. Now, I'd like to invite someone special to the stage. The audience fell silent in anticipation. From behind the curtains, a 10-year-old boy stepped out, Lucas. He had grown stronger, healthier, his once frail frame now filled with life. His eyes, however, had not changed. They still held the same fire, the same determination. Lucas walked up to the podium, standing beside Trump. He took a deep breath, then spoke, his voice clear and unwavering. 2 years ago, I thought I was going to die. I thought that was the end, but Mr. Trump gave me a chance, and I will not waste it. Lucas paused, looking out at the thousands of people hanging on to his words. I know there are many more kids out there like me, and I want to tell them, don't give up. There will always be someone who wants to help you. Believe in that. The crowd erupted once more, some even wiping away tears. Lucas then turned to Trump and smiled. I promised you I'd become a doctor, and I intend to keep that promise. Trump placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. I know you will, kid, and I'll be right here to see it happen. Beyond America, a legacy of hope. After the event, Trump returned to his office. Standing by the massive glass window, he looked down at the glowing streets of Washington. Behind him, an advisor entered, holding a report. Sir, as of today, Hope for the Forgotten has impacted over 50 million lives worldwide. More countries are reaching out to adopt the model. Trump remained silent, flipping through the pages, his eyes deep in thought. The advisor hesitated, then asked, People are wondering, will you stop here? Is this the final limit? Trump closed the report, turning to face his advisor. Limit? His eyes burned with determination. There is no limit. We are far from finished. He set the report down, crossing his arms. How many people are still waiting for help? How many children are still dying without medicine? How many families are still trapped in poverty? The advisor fell silent. Trump turned back to the window, his reflection blending with the city skyline. His voice, though quiet, was unyielding. We are not stopping. We will never stop until there is no one left to be forgotten. The advisor nodded. I'll prepare the next phase. Trump, do it. We have a whole world to change. A new door had opened. A new chapter in humanitarian history had begun. And this was just the beginning. The true meaning of Hope for the Forgotten. The story of Lucas, Evelyn, and the Hope for the Forgotten movement is more than just a tale of compassion and justice. It is a reminder that in a world where too many are abandoned, one small act can change a life, perhaps even the course of humanity. We may not all be Donald Trump. We may not have power or billions of dollars to build hospitals or launch global initiatives. But each of us can do something. A kind glance, a word of encouragement, a small act of help. Each of these actions can create a ripple effect of goodness, opening a new path for someone lost in despair. Even in today's world, millions of Lucases are still waiting to be saved. Countless Evelyns are still fighting in the shadows, unheard, unseen. The real question is, do we dare to stop, to truly see these lives, and to take action? Because in the end, the greatness of a society is not measured by skyscrapers or economic numbers. It is measured by how we treat the weakest among us. And if there is one lesson to take away from this story, it is this. You don't have to change the entire world, but you can change someone's world. Start today. This is the powerful conclusion that connects directly with the reader. It delivers a strong call to action, reminding everyone that even the smallest effort can create a real impact. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or additional emotional depth.